welcome to a new Getting to Know Japan webinar. Thank you for joining us, and a big thank you to our program sponsor, the Japan Foundation New York, for funding this series and enabling us to put this on each week. Today, we are joined by Dr. Kaori Yoshida, who will be presenting on Japanese pop culture, the paradoxical nature of the Kawaii Concept. Dr. Kaori Yoshida is a professor at Ritsumeikan Asia Pacific University in Japan, specializing in media and cultural studies, gender and ethnic representation, and popular culture. Her current research interests include the gendering of war memory construction through popular media and popular memories constructed by war museums. She teaches courses such as Japanese pop culture, media and culture, and the introduction to media studies. To learn more about Dr. Yoshida's publications, please visit the YCAP's website. Dr. Yoshida, it is a pleasure to have you with us here today. I'll let you take it from here.
Thank you very much for your introduction, Mani. And let me share my screen. I'm Kaori Yoshida. I'm currently working at Ritsumeikan Asia Pacific University, which is located in Beppu, Oita. And hopefully I'll introduce what I do on my research as well as my teaching to my students here. Initially, I didn't put the first word here in the title, but as I have been going through and double checking today's talk content, I thought it'd be more exploring rather than something that is already set and established and fixed. So as I talk, I'd like you to kind of explore some probably a new dimension of what you might have already known about Japanese popular culture, as well as kawaii or cute culture in specific. So what you see on the screen here is the what is called Chibi Maruko-chan. That is the logo that you see in the front of the train. And Chibi Maruko-chan train that has been running. I think they stopped running, but it has been running in Shizuoka prefecture for quite a while. So I thought this would be good start to present or represent the Chibi Maruko-chan train to talk about the content for today in my talk. So more specifically, this is a little bit more detail, and hopefully that gives you some hints or some points that you might want to raise later on in discussion Q&A session. So there are two components, major components. In the first section, I'll talk general idea of cool Japan. I'm sure most of you or all of you here have heard the term cool Japan, and also how uniquely Japanese it is. And when anyone is consuming Japanese popular culture, we might want to think what really we are consuming through using or watching Japanese popular culture or Japanese cultural products. And then the second section, I'd like to get into a little bit more specific component aspect of Japanese popular culture, which is kawaii culture or cute culture, and how paradoxical concept this is when we look into kawaii culture. It's more complex than what appear to be like when we see fluffy animals and stuffed animals and really cute babies, and they are cute. But when we look at this kawaii culture, specifically in Japanese context, particularly in post-war period, there's something really contradictory or paradoxical thoughts that we could see. So we after we look at the general definition of kawaii, I'd like to introduce a couple of specific examples for us to think about what kawaii culture really does and play specific role in contemporary Japanese society. So everyone knows Hello Kitty, I think, most of you, and how Hello Kitty is globally known, and she is everywhere. And this is one of the examples that I took picture at University of British Columbia in Canada, Vancouver. When I visited, I saw a bunch of Hello Kitty wearing UBC, the university uniform, and laid in a bookshelf at the bookstore. And I thought it was quite phenomenal. So it's not really easy to define what Japanese culture is, but at least we can talk about some characteristics or functions of the term Japanese popular culture in contemporary context. So you could describe Japanese popular culture as information flows associated with Japan. And a lot of people define different ways, but more or less they're quite overlap to each other. So you could describe Japanese pop culture, a source of forming image of Japan. It's part of national branding when it's taken and implemented by Ministry of Foreign Affairs, for example. And essentially authentically Japanese, or what we often called Japaneseness, that we arguably see in these information flows. And one of the scholars associated with the global phenomena of Japanese popular culture, just like what I showed here in the case of university in Canada, it's a globalized set of phenomena. So it's Japanese popular culture. And of course, we can see something more or less uniquely Japan, unique to Japan, but at the same time, it is everywhere. And we cannot really talk about specifically only in Japanese context only. So a lot of examples that I laid here. So people talk about Japanese popular culture and the specific characteristics here. For example, Japanese pop culture is ubiquitous, hot, increasingly influential. And Japan now, between 20th and 21st century, contribute not to our material lives, but also to our everyday cultural lives as well. So it's not the materials that matters, but it's more influential because it's everywhere, every corner of a lot of people's life, no matter where you live in a globe. And if we take as example of Japanese animation called anime, there's also specifically unique in Japanese popular culture as Japanese popular culture product. For example, looking at narrative structure and what is perhaps most striking about anime compared to other imported media that have been modified for American market, specifically this writer is talking about American context, is the lack of compromise in making these narrative palatable. So again, a very expected ending or how narrative is structured is quite characteristic to Japanese animation called anime in comparison to other imported animated film. And also, a lot of people consider Japanese animation has some subversive aspect as well. For example, anime is prominent element, the subversive element in comparison with much of American popular culture. And lastly, this is more related to how people in contemporary Japan can create their own identity by means of Japanese popular culture. It says, I quote, with its rapid shift of narrative pace and its constantly transforming imagery, animation's emphasis on metamorphosis can be seen as the ideal artistic vehicle for expressing the postmodern obsession with fluctuating identity. So here, it's trying to connect the postmodern way of people identifying itself that is projected to how the content as well as the form of this particular media, anime, is trying to express and represent. So those are some examples that some people just try to describe the characteristics and functions of Japanese popular culture. Some examples, the very well-known Studio Ghibli's, one of the famous works, Princess Mononoke, released in 1997, has a very subversive aspect in terms of gender and gender role in Japanese context, as well as other societies in the globe. For example, what you see are whole bunch of women who are working while men are not in the frame working. They're not necessarily shown on the screen while they're working. The focus is the women as a main source of labor here, and that's a main source of how this particular town survives. And down on the left side is again the women are trying to practice the shooting, which is typically the man's male job, but all people here are women who are handling the guns. So in contrast, what men are shown in comparison to women are those who are saved by women, or the leader, the female leader of the Iron Town here is the one who is very good the handling the huge gun, again, that is considered to be more masculine or male role. When people are fight, they're both female rather than men typically fighting each other. So considering what uniquely Japanese popular culture, especially in this case, visual media, we can see some aspects of Japan or Japanness. But there's something very typical and unique that we could often see in Japanese animation, and that makes this particular media quite transportable globally. So what you see here is, again, Japan, more futuristic Japan, and it's considered to be Fukuoka City, used in this film, the functioning as capital city. So something about Japan, but not necessarily, but you can definitely identify something Japan-like in animation. Very famous 1988's animation that has been sold globally again is Akira. Here now it's no longer Neo Tokyo, but at the time when the film was produced, it was the scene of Neo-Tokyo. Again, you see something Tokyo, but again, you cannot really pinpoint, but you could feel the Japanness, although it could have been any places, big city like Hong Kong or Los Angeles. Same thing here. So again, this is Studio Ghibli's another work, Spirited Away. And here again, you see some fantastical world. It can be maybe Asian, one of the Asian country or mix of Asian countries, not necessarily Japan, but there's always a hint of Japan-ness. So based on what we saw, what I showed here, different visual examples. So what is really Japan represented in those Japanese animation or anime? What we see is something Japan or pseudo-Japanese that works only as a symbolic function. So it's basically fantasy world filled with some Japanese-like imagery that most of the people who watch the visuals could identify or understand as Japan. And that enabled to simplify Japanese society that way in terms of visual. Or also we can describe it as another term, mukokuseki, literally translated statelessness. That is culturally orderless. By Iwabuchi, Koichi Iwabuchi described this kind of scenery or this kind of sense of non-belonging is no culturally rooted order. So it's not really Japan that we can smell, although there's something Japan in it. That is typically we could see computer or consumer technologies, cartoons, and computers. And those components sell quite widely because of the characteristics that I mentioned by pseudo-Japanese or mukokuseki, statelessness, cultural odorless. So something cool about Japanese popular culture, including what I presented now visually in Japanese animation, anime. And Cool Japan, as most of you have heard, is Mark Gray's description of Japanese contemporary culture or soft power of Japanese popular culture. So he says, I quote, Japan's history of remarkable revival suggests that the outcome of that transformation is more likely to be rebirth than ruin. And standing stride channels of communication, Japan already possesses a vast reverse of potential soft power. And with the cultural reach of superpower already in place, it's hard to imagine that Japan will be content to remain so much medium and so little message, unquote. So this is what he described, particularly talking about, describing about post-war Japan, apparently, and how it's kind of hinting there's something not necessarily essential, but something that is existing, like embedded in Japanese way of communication and culturally that enable Japan to be a superpower or one of the leader of the soft power through popular culture. So as I mentioned earlier briefly, Cool Japan is national branding. The government, the bodies are involved, and Cool Japan can be also, for that reason, considered as a discourse, or some probably would say kind of ideological device as well. And that described to kind of showing to enhance national image in global society, and that sells and boosting Japanese culture economy. So that is kind of national project. At the same time, this phrase that I quote here really shows how complex and potentially problematic about cool Japan. It's not just cool, but it has something that we probably have to pay attention to. So there's a kind of story here. Japanese newspaper carried an intriguing story in early July 2006. Two French girls, both aged 16, who lived in suburbs of Paris, were taken into police custody in Poland after making train trips through Belgium and Germany. Their final destination was Japan. Fascinated by Japanese manga and pop music, they had planned to make train connection across Europe and Russia to Korean Peninsula, and then travel by ship to Japan, which they fantasized about as the land of manga and dreamlike lifestyle. Although these elements do represent aspects of Japanese society, interpretation based excessively or merely on these lenses lose sight of Japan's variegation and heterogeneity and verge on a new kind of stereotyping. So again, referring back to how the cool Japan can be considered one of the discourses that can potentially create different kind of stereotyping, which had been kind of more traditional way of stereotypes. So I want to look more into it by looking at specific examples, how cool Japan can be, in a way, on the one hand, liberating, at the same time, sort of oppressing as well. And it works very, there's always fine line between those two components. So here, I want you to look at how uniquely this cool Japan, one of the examples of cool Japan is. And I'd like to show you video before I'll talk anything about that.
I now pronounce you man and virtual wife. A 35-year-old man in Japan has decided to give up his pursuit of finding the perfect woman, instead opting to marry a computer character who took on doll form for the sake of their wedding. His bride is Hatsune Miku. She's a virtual reality star in Japan with thousands of loyal fans. She was developed as a computer-generated singing software that resembles a 16-year-old anime pop star. Her creator, Krypton Future Media, declined to comment when approached by Reuters. They declared their love for each other in front of nearly 40 wedding guests this month in an $18,000 ceremony. Weeks after their vows, Akihiko Kondo is settling into married life. When he returns home in the Japanese suburbs, after work in a local middle school, a holographic projection of his bride welcomes him home. Tadaima. She can recognize his face and voice and is programmed to respond with simple phrases and songs. Hatsune Miku's projection was developed by Japanese tech developer Gatebox. Last year, they began issuing marriage registration forms. They're not official, but according to their website, nearly 4,000 of these so-called certificates have been downloaded. Kondo says some people have accused him of being a creepy otaku, which loosely translates to geeks who live an antisocial life. Others have accused him of contributing to Japan's declining population, while some have even accused him of stealing their pop star. But that doesn't faze Kondo, nor does the fact his parents didn't attend his wedding. He says he hopes his declaration of love to a trademarked character will inspire others to find marital bliss, in whatever form that might take.
Let me go back to slides. And I hope I have a little bit more time to the more specific aspects of Cool Japan that I really wanted to talk about today. As I mentioned earlier briefly, one of the components of Cool Japan is Kawaii culture or cute culture. And it really represents how paradoxical this Kawaii concept or cuteness, if we put that in Japanese context, it's between liberation or oppression. So cute culture, typically you see those and you probably quickly recognize they are considered to be kawaii, or some old women that have lived up to 100 years, and they're considered to be very kawaii. So generally, the kawaii aesthetics, if we describe it, the ideas of kawaii is childlike or sweet, as well as weakness or disabledness that need to be other people's help. So cute in Japanese context, kawaii can be cute, but at the same time pitiful, kawaii so, along with that. Another example you often see is those idols. The AKB48 is one of the typical idols that represent kawaii, and Carrie Pamu on the right side, another idol. So kawaii concept can be behaved, or someone can become kawaii, and cute object, becoming cute object themselves. And it's often associated with the sense of infantile and denying the maturity. And why Cool Japan is associated with kawaii oftentimes is also represented with the ambassador of kawaii that has been part of Cool Japan project. And you see those three women, girls, are personified the concepts of Lolita and Harajuku teen in the middle, and schoolgirls. Those are representative of ambassador of Kawaii 2009. And it's interesting to see how the director official was talking about this ambassador dispatched to global places, different places globally. He says the objective of this ambassador of Kawaii is to promote an understanding of Japan, a better image, or the correct image. So you see some hint of potential problematics in it, in this quotation. It's oftentimes criticized because of the this iconic image of kawaii showing the rather conventional gender norms, and also non-threatening image of girls. So the issue comes up because Ministry of Foreign Affairs is considered to be promoting fantasy capital in which women and girls might be consumed as object of desire. And that's why a lot of sort of feminist people started criticizing this this project. I'll probably skip a couple of slides and introducing a couple of opposite side of how kawaii culture played and performed by girls can be possibly considered to be more subversive or challenging the social norm or normal gender expectation in a society. And I'll probably skip that. Just a couple of examples. Those girls are sort of like the fighters that are putting gadgets from the parts of former battleship that had been used actually during the war, turned into animation. But subversive aspect is how girls are actually out of control. That is mentioned by one of the critics here. Obviously, the criticism comes from some scholars who consider the kawaii out of control girls performing and playing with cute culture is really part of moral panic. But this girls jumping up and girls boisterous can be used as a part of subversion or challenging the social norm or normative gender identity. So using very hyper feminine characters of girls' culture or kawaii or extremely cuteness and extremely feminine, as opposed to what is called rikuruto sutsu, where job hunting ladies or the first day of work coming back home with black suit, which is following the social norm. In comparison, what girls' culture through kawaii attire or extremely kawaii attire is an expression of challenging the normativity in social gender identity. So kawaii fashion can be considered also the rebel against social values and obligation and reality. So it's a fantasy, but at the same time, it has create the meaning that makes sense to themselves among their girls, the fantasy world. Some more examples, Harajuku fashion. You can see they're all made for mass culture products. You see ribbons on all cute products, but they use their in a very specific way and in a way very original and eccentric in a way that even goes beyond the typical image of kawaii or feminine. But they have their own subjectivity to create meaning and innovating their own culture that doesn't really fit what is considered to be typically feminine in society. So one of the example is the Carrie Pamipamu, and she is crowned Harajuku Kawaii ambassador. She's the leader of this kind of eccentric kawaii fashion that kind of reclaim the statement that doesn't follow typical feminine style or gender norm. So the way, interesting way of how this girl idol is using is instead of imposed the gender role the femininity imposed on her, but instead she uses the kawaii or cuteness as a masquerade. So gender, she's claiming that the gender or femininity is something that you can put on just like mask that you can take off as well. In that way, this kind of flexibility is creating a space for women or young women to explore and play around kawaii cute culture, and challenging the typical criticism a lot of people would put on those kawaii cute culture and kawaii culture, super feminine. And this is my presentation. Sorry, I had to very quickly going through some parts. I wish I had a little bit more time, but I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Yoshida. That was really, really interesting. And it was really very colorful. And you mentioned a lot of really great examples. So thank you so much for presenting for us today. So to begin our Q&A session, I wanted to ask you, so you mentioned about kawaii towards the end of your presentation. Do you think this concept of like kawaii or cuteness has influenced beauty standards in Japan? Or do you think this kind of like this hope or this desire to be different, or as you mentioned, like the subversiveness of something that goes against like femininity has helped to further this concept?
Yeah, thank you. So kawaii hasn't really appeared from nowhere. I mean, it's the kawaii concept has, you can trace back to Heian period even in novels, and it's initially described as something small. So you can help that person or object. So that has been constantly appeared as a kind of kawaii concept. At the same time, kawaii products have been distributed and disseminated through girls' culture in modern time, or when Japan was trying to modernize. And that was a time that Meiji Revolution, the nation was trying to educate women, young women, so that they can help nation building, modern nation building. So that is a time through education, the girls are educated in a very conventional way and very typically feminine in a modern way. So that has been the beginning, and it's saturated through the modern period up to 60s and 70s. And 2000 or late 1990s or 2000 onward, that's the time something else has been emerging. So instead of thinking about one type of kawaii, there are different varieties of kawaii, and a couple of them can be very subversive or even offensive, but it gives power as an innovator who could otherwise no way of creating their own subculture. And this innovative expression by using what is considered to be typically feminine can be grotesquely feminine, that can challenge the social norm of gender identity. I hope I answered your question.
You did. I just wanted to add a little bit more to that, based on what you said. So do you think this, because this kind of, kawaii culture and the many subcultures that fall underneath it are so popular in Japan, do you think that like it represents what Japanese people, whether female or male, what they find attractive? because in the West, it's a little bit more grown, like we have different images of what's attractive, you know, whereas in Japan, whether it's in media, whether it's like what you see on the street, it's more cute. So do you think that it represents what Japanese people, you know, find attractive, you know,
Yeah, I mean, I think people probably argue against it, but I think in Japan, childhood is kind of nostalgia and ideal states, and these girls trying to remain in the bubble before they get into and hit into very the social expectation as women or marriage and so forth. So it's a privilege for those women to have that. And at the same time, because the childhood is considered to be something ideal in the society, not only women, but as a society. And that's why people would idolize or are fond of those type of kawaii-ness. I mean, this Kaori Pamipamu, the idol, has been often compared with Lady Gaga in terms of subversiveness. But Lady Gaga can be considered subversive only in the context of US. Kaori Pamipamu's, like you said, they're too cute and they cannot be challenging or subversive in different contexts, but it can work only in the context of Japan.
Thank you so much. So from your presentation, there was a quote that said, subversive aspect of anime is a prominent element in comparison with much of American pop culture. So DK asked, how is this subversive? Like, in what way?
One of the typical example is, well, since I'm always interested in gender aspect, whether it's gender bending, cross-dressing is one of the classic example that was very popular since 70s onward. But Japan has, in comparison, typically in comparison to Disney, gender role is still very, I mean, for example, instead of using princess, a lot of Japanese animation, including Studio Ghibli's one, androgynous female characters as a heroine. That is one of the example, and also how women take role in the narrative is quite different. Subversive maybe is a little bit too strong, maybe, but at the same time, it can destabilize what have been typically expected by the audience in terms of gender role. So in that sense, it's quite subversive. And also what is considered, well, I mean, animation oftentimes, arguably in the States, it's for children. But in Japan, any dark side or death or any darker topics are also introduced and discussed and explored. And that is also one of the subversive aspects of Japanese animation in comparison to other.
Thank you. The next question comes from Vivian Ying. The two texts mentioned are from 1997 and 2001. Was there sufficient Western exposure to Japanese anime back then for Western scholars to form an unbiased opinion about anime?
That's an interesting question. I mean, I think the oftentimes 1990s, I mean, and 2000, a lot of scholars have been tend to compare Japanese TV animation with American TV shows animations, and in terms of visual expression as well as a narrative. So I think they did have exposure to Western context as well. I don't know if it answers the question.
Thank you so much. She also asked, is Mukokuseki really that core to Japanese anime now? For example, director Shinkai Makoto intentionally sets his more recent anime movies, those after the 3/11 earthquake, in Japan. We also have many anime series that are set in various places in Japan, resulting in a recent flood of tourists to, among other things, a train crossing in Kanagawa, for example.
Yeah. So of course, the when Iwabuchi Koichi mentioned and introduced the term, it was back then. At the same time, though, when we think about how globally it can travel, Japanese anime, of course, it's not only Japanese animation, maybe Chinese animation, Korean animation, Asian animation travel quite a lot lately. And of course, people mobilize a lot in comparison to 20th century or the beginning of 21st century. So people are more exposure, have more exposure. Audiences have more exposure to other countries, and that gives opportunity for those people to experience. And they're getting used to. They're not really kind of rejecting anything unfamiliar. So in a way, the way it appeals is not because Mukokuseki, but perhaps there's no boundary in a way that people consider certain image of particular countries. So in a way, without any national boundaries or cultural boundaries, they have more mixed set or some I don't know how to explain that. The not necessarily like a merged space where audiences are enjoying, appreciating something different from the statelessness that has used to be like. But at the same time, because of the exposure, people instead of rejecting Japaneseness, they're trying to kind of seek for Japaneseness because they're not necessarily foreign anymore. So it's a kind of hint of element and fascination, perhaps. But it's a good question that I probably have to explore. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Lauren Latouche Charles asked, I'd like to ask, what is your personal opinion on the kawaii culture today? Would you say it still has a strong subversive power, or that in certain areas like some Japanese fashion that may have stricter rules like Lolita fashion, it may be more rule bound?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's probably endless, and it has both sides all the time. So I mean, in American context, for example, Lady Gaga, some people consider that very post-feminist or very liberal, in a way, like a sexually liberating sort of icon. At the same time, people take different ways. So we can create a new interpretation of those fashions, and but it is that how we interpret that is new. Because if we look at the fashion itself, it can be probably extremely sexy and too sexy if we look at actual icon and things itself. But I think we can take new interpretation. We can invent new interpretation that can be argued as a part of, like we can claim there's a hint of subversion or subversive aspect, challenging the normal. And some people actually performed intentionally those Harajuku girls. I think they're not necessarily following what a lot of people consider feminine. They're doing for their own, with their own subjectivity and innovation for their own sake.
Thank you so much.
There's also ero kawaii nowadays as well. That is very controversial as well.
So our final question, very quickly, Catherine Mazur asked, who or what does kawaii subvert? Or do you think kawaii really is beyond girl? Just look at the city mascots or packaging. So much is super sweet. Is this sweetness, kawaii-ness, something powerfully flexible and therefore a great kind of weapon or instrument for young women, or really young men as well, to use for a deeper self-reflection and empowerment?
I think that is what has been going on. It's very, I probably want to quote that as it is. I mean, it's interesting. The things are, at least we can interpret this phenomena of kawaii in contemporary society of Japan, or even outside Japan, is not attached to or played by or enjoyed by girls or young women or even women in general. So it becomes probably more genderless, or people are more genderless. So they don't really consider certain materials are supposed to be attached to certain generation or certain gender. And kawaii can be, and anyone can become kawaii. And it can create, one can create statement by putting on kawaii, whether they are man or woman or young or old. So it's very flexible tool, I think, to create certain statement and claim if they want.
Thank you so much. I think that was a perfect end and a perfect question to end our Q&A session. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
And again, thank you so much, Dr. Yoshida, for taking time out of your day to be with us. We really enjoyed your presentation. Once again, thank you to our program sponsor, the Japan Foundation New York, and thank you to our great audience for the wonderful question. And we hope to see you next week. Thank you so much.